From the RSNA, this is the Radiology Artificial Intelligence Podcast. My name is Paul Yee, and I'm a radiologist and co-host of the podcast.
And my name is Ali Tejani, and I'm a radiologist and co-host of the podcast. Each month, we dive into the hottest topics in radiology AI and talk with leading experts, thought leaders, and movers and shakers in the field. Welcome back to the Radiology AI podcast. It's time for that roundtable that we've been talking about for a few weeks now. And you may have heard about this when we spoke briefly with our prior guest, Dr. Christian Bluethgen, on a recent episode. But large language models are everywhere. We're seeing all kinds of papers, all kinds of research being reported. Maybe they're not all being reported the same way. Maybe there's a need for some standardization in how we report our findings. Well, today's our chance to talk more about it. And I'm so excited to have our guests here today. We'll meet them in just a moment here. But first, Paul, it's always a journey, when we try to find a topic and when we invite our speakers over. But I'm really excited this time because I think we've been trying to have this conversation for a few weeks now.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think we're literally going beyond our borders, getting an international group of experts here. So I'm super excited that we get to talk about this fast-moving field. It seems like even just a few weeks, a lot of things have happened. So it'll be good to talk about it.
Absolutely. And so let me start with our guests. Can you briefly introduce yourselves? Let us know who you are, where you're working right now, and let's say how you got involved with large language model research or large language models in practice.
How about one fun fact?
Oh, that too.
Yeah, so my name is Chris. Thank you for inviting me here to this podcast. I'm an academic radiologist. I'm currently an attending radiologist at the University Hospital in Zurich in Switzerland. I'm specializing in thoracic imaging, and I'm also doing research for a couple of years now. I spent roughly 1.5 years at Stanford, where I was fortunate to go into the AMI Center, the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and Imaging, under Kurt Langlotz and also Akshay Chaudhary. And I took a really deep dive into all aspects of using deep learning for medical image and text analysis. And recently I gave a talk for the trainee board at the Radiology AI journal. And we had a fun discussion, and now I'm back to dive further into the LLM topic with you guys. Oh, and the fun fact about me, I had to think on the spot, but I'm probably one of the few German people who doesn't like soccer very much.
Hi everyone, I am Tugba. I am currently a radiology resident in Switzerland and about to finish actually. I first involved with LLM research actually by reviewing papers. I suddenly started to receive large amount of papers on this topic, and I was so curious, of course, since the end of 2022. I was also trying to also educate myself on LLMs. And yeah, I then write a review about how we can apply large language models to medicine, but especially in radiology, and what would be the challenges and so on. And yeah, the fun fact about me, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but I recently learned that I am super recognizer. I can recognize the faces. It's for me, it doesn't matter if it is dark, if there is light, enough light, I can recognize the people from the back of their head. And I quite recently I learned that it is not something that everyone can do. But I am sure that within the radiology society, I think we would have a lot of super recognizers.
How did you learn this? Was there like an official board? I know you recently took your board exams, so maybe this was like a supplemental.
There is a test. Actually, I was reading an article in a magazine. Actually, it was not a scientific article, but I learned that there is a test about detecting this kind of people. And I took that test and I passed it with the flying colors. And you can actually certified on being super recognizer. And actually, what I didn't know was the police and law enforcement using those kind of people to find out the suspects. Or you can take the test. I can send you the link.
Wow, so you're sort of a large language model yourself, Tuba.
Sounds like a good side gig. I mean, honestly, I may look into that. If you can send Paul and I those details, we'll always be open to to those hobbies. And how about our next guest? So, Merel, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, hi guys. Hi, Ali and Paul. Thanks so much for inviting me on this podcast. My name is Merel Huisman. I'm an attending radiologist from Radboud Nijmegen, the Netherlands. So we're both from Europe, which I think is really great in this podcast. So my affinity with large language models, I guess, is more on the educational and meta-knowledge side more than in-depth research. I mean, I've been interested in AI for 6 years now, and of course, large language models is something that started to surge in the end of 2021. And I just started to, just like I did with AI, educating myself and trying to, to find out the details of ChatGPT at the time. And as such, I wrote a few things here and there, and also had some educational talks about it in the Netherlands in my uni as well, and internationally as well in the RSA webinar. But it's more like an overview than that I'm a researcher on LLMs. But I have reviewed a lot though for both radiology and radiology AI on LLMs. The fun fact. I'm not sure if I shared this fun fact already in the previous podcast, but I'll give you guys a couple. I have been a perfume influencer on Instagram a few years back. It went very well. I was sharing information on perfumes. I have an enormous collection. I love them. I love many of them. And yeah, that went well, but it's hard to combine with a radiology career. And I love languages. I speak French, Spanish, and Portuguese on a reasonable level. And yeah, that's a little bit about me apart from radiology.
Thank you. I love learning about our guests. It's just great to see the different experiences, the rich backgrounds that we all come from. And I mean, how fitting is it that we're talking about large language models today, right? Thank you for what you've done for our field and for our journal over the years as well. I think it's just such a great opportunity to be able to sit down and to pick your minds on this topic, because I think it's just so relevant. And Meryl, you said that you've been working with large language models for some time, even before 2022, and I can relate, because every time we talk about large language models with our trainees, we talk about how ChatGPT wasn't the first time that we've seen large language models. It's just more available and more in the public eye, I think, now. So, with that context, maybe we can talk more about the background here. What's the current state of large language model related research or publications, especially as we think about how it's changed over the last 2 to 3 years? It's definitely increased, but maybe we can give our listeners a bit of context on how things have changed, or how we're seeing things evolve in the last few years here.
First of all, I would like to say it's changing almost day by day. So it's impossible that I will give a full overview. I think we really need to educate each other here because everybody picks out something else from the literature. For me, what I have seen mostly is that it's different in a sense because it's democratization of AI on steroids. Everybody can do research now, whether or not they have a background in research. So I feel that in the beginning there were a lot of like editorials and also like reviews on what is large language models, what are those, and then you started to see a lot of like Me Too papers, people trying to analyze all kinds of things without necessarily a good methodology. But I think this is only normal when you have a new technique. It's just that it's magnified, I feel, with large language models compared to AI earlier. And in earlier stages we have been talking about, or you and Christian have been talking about lack of standardization. And now I think the past few months or year, we have seen things like new metrics being proposed and used as well. Hallucination mitigating strategies being proposed, and also more focus on open source comparison studies and image analysis as well. I feel like now it has come down a little bit, actually. Image analysis I saw a lot maybe last year, and now lately not so much, but maybe I haven't been looking in the right places. So maybe Tugba can fill me in here.
So for me, it was really thrilling to watch all these advancements. And as Merel said, the field is moving so fast, and it is becoming very challenging to keep up with the literature. And but if we look at our journals portfolio, we have already published several high quality LLM papers. And not surprisingly, as I told, the articles I have been reviewing are also dominated with LLM research. And looking at the literature in general, I feel like the field is shifting from solely focusing on language models to visual language models, or foundational models, if you like. And I feel like some of this research may not stay as research for long. It looks like, especially the open source LLMs, could easily be implemented in clinical settings if it has not already been. I know you already talked about this in the previous episode with Christian, but I would like to emphasize once again that open source LLMs are really important to ensure patient safety and privacy, as they do not require information to be shared with third parties.
So the landscape of large language model research, I think, has undergone a dramatic transformation in the last 2 to 3 years. So on the research side alone, which we want to talk about today, this field has seen a massive surge in publications. I looked this up when I wrote a commentary for European Radiology in March 2023, and back then it was 7,700 publications. And in the meantime, it jumped over 20-fold. This morning, when I was last checking that number, it was already 177,000, which is a massive increase. And the wake of this touches all levels of academic publishing release, from the research proposals that are written to the manuscript drafts that we see, to the speed with which preprints appear, and also the implications for distinguished journals like Nature Medicine, where these papers eventually appear. And I think there are two key factors that really drive this surge. On the one hand, LLMs have become significantly more capable and versatile, and especially these abilities for instruction following and in-context learning have stood the relatively short test of time and allow these newer LLMs to flexibly adapt to new tasks without requiring to retrain them. The second thing that is supported by the first thing I mentioned, but that also really drives the recent success, I think, is the wide accessibility of these models, with ChatGPT being a prime example of that. And there's a very user-friendly interface that allows it to, or that allowed it to reach 1 million users in just 5 days. And it went up to 100 million active users per month in just 2 months, which is a record and is an example of the fastest growing user base at this point. For instance, if you compare it to Spotify, that took over 4 years to get there. And now with these components, we have multiple outlets that contribute to LLM research. That includes big tech companies, smaller and bigger academic labs, and also a significant amount of people that have never done natural language processing or even machine learning research before. So we have a high heterogeneity in the expertise that these people bring to the table that test and conduct research on the LLMs. And so overall, in the past 2 or 3 years, the research landscape, I think, has evolved to become much, much, much faster paced and much larger in volume. And this acceleration really has put pressure both on the people that conduct the research as well as on the traditional academic processes and the structures that are associated with that. So peer review struggles to keep up. Researchers in the field, they face increased pressure to publish. And I think another notable effect, especially in publishing, is that preprints have nowadays much more attention assigned to them than they used to in the past, because basically the traditional peer review process has a hard time to keep up with that.
So that's really encouraging to hear that things are maybe getting more rigorous and kind of expanding beyond just text. But can you get a little more specific? What are the trends in publications these days involving LLMs or foundation models in terms of use cases or even the models used? You mentioned open source. But I'm wondering, is there anything more particular that you're noticing or excited about?
Yeah, so I think there are several trends in the publications that we see. I base this on both what I'm seeing as a peer reviewer as well as on systematic reviews, the few that I've read, and I'll try to summarize a bit here. So in terms of the models that are used, there's a clear predominance of OpenAI's GPT models here. That in the systematic reviews that I've looked into, they accounted for approximately 80% of the studies. I think this is both to the power that these models bring and also to the accessibility, due to the accessibility that these models come. It also implies that currently there is a dominance of these closed proprietary models over their more open alternatives. And that comes with a whole array of implications, of course. Regarding the specialties that use these LLMs in medicine, there is a comprehensive study from Nigam Shah's lab at Stanford that looked in over 500 publications and found that most of these LLM applications focused on internal medicine, with over 40% of the studies that were looked into, followed by surgery with 11%, and then radiology itself had a relatively little share, which is, I think, in a stark contrast to the amount of FDA-approved devices that we're seeing, where out of the currently 950 approved devices, 76% are for radiology applications. But this is, of course, not restricted to LLMs. And the use cases that we see in the literature that gets published currently, these are pretty diverse. So in radiology, and I'm citing from another review now that looked into studies up until January of 2024, which included a total of 44 studies. These LLMs in radiology were primarily tested for diagnosis and clinical decision support in over 45% of cases, simplification of radiology reports in 80% of cases, and enhancing patient communication in 14% of cases. Now, across healthcare more broadly, although obviously we are all radiologists here, most studies were looking into the quality of the medical knowledge that LLMs were using. So that was roughly 44% of studies, followed by using LLMs to make diagnoses, with 90% of the studies educating patients and making treatment recommendations. So in my opinion, especially testing LLMs for medical knowledge is a suboptimal use of their ability, and we can discuss this later on maybe. And interestingly, very few of these studies focused on something that I think would be very interesting to focus on the administrative applications. So, for instance, providing billing codes or generating clinical referrals or note-taking. And most of these studies said that the performance of LLMs was promising, but most notably, none of these studies recommended to use these LLMs in an unsupervised way, which is kind of a relief, because we know the critique that LLMs can output false information, and we know this recent study in Nature Medicine that looked into a more realistic scenario where LLMs have access to a lot of different diagnostic information, and they failed to follow diagnostic or treatment guidelines, failed to interpret lab results correctly. So there's a lot of caveats in the use of these LLMs for patient-centered tasks, and that's why I think it's a considerable relief that none of these studies recommends this use.
What I'm excited about is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG for short. And I feel like RAG is gaining momentum, and RAG is particularly useful because it allows us to easily fine tune these models to our specific needs. And for instance, we can provide the model with our medical guidelines, or we use a lot of classification systems in radiology, and this will not only enhance the accuracy of the outputs but also mitigates the risk of confabulations. And I recently came across this preference about an end-to-end framework called RadioRack, where authors evaluated the diagnostic accuracy of various LLMs with and without retrieval of information from Radiopedia, our popular website. And they used questions from RSNA case collection. And they also reported improvements in diagnostic accuracy when additional information retrieved from Radiopedia was available. And I think we are going to see more research on applications of RAG.
Yeah, can that's super interesting. I think RAG is also very exciting. But for our listeners who aren't familiar with it, can you explain, what is RAG? How does it work at a conceptual level?
So it is, as the name actually says, it is retrieval augmented generation. So you need to provide your own set of information or set of rules. You can set them as you wish, and then uh, the model will provide the outputs taking into account your own set of rules, because um, starting from scratch and training a specific medical model, large language model, would be very um, time consuming as well as very expensive. So what we can do with racks is that's why it is very promising.
Yeah, I would like to second that. I think more focus has been put on like domain adaptation and providing context as a way to fight hallucinations and to make those models more useful. Something that has been quite trendy, but maybe less applicable to us is like clinical text summarization. I mean, it would be very useful for us, but I have not seen many publications on that, but more in other medical fields. But it would be super useful for us radiologists as well. So I would be really excited about research like that. And something I find very fascinating as well is the agentic workflows. Agentic workflow would mean that like the model acts as a persona, and then given specific sets of rules operates autonomically, and maybe interacts as well with other agents. And I even have seen a company online where they have the agents for hire as a nurse. So where instead of like actual nurses calling patients, I don't know, for rheumatoid diseases or kind of guiding those patients for cancer and treatments like that, there's now agents being sold already as they have a picture. I mean, we can cut this part out, by the way, but they have a whole identity as an agent, LLM powered agent, which I find pretty interesting as a Don't know if you've heard about this already.
Yes. So the concept of AI agents, I will say, I think conceptually it makes sense, but to me, it still seems very much like conceptual, or people are still figuring out how do you implement this. On one hand, I could see having separate LLMs that maybe take on a persona. And I don't know, Merrill, you probably know better than I do, but I would imagine you kind of give it some prompts saying, like, you are a radiologist, or you are a technologist, or you are a patient coordinator. But I think that's really interesting because when I think about it, let's say that's in whatever capacity we give these LLMs these personas, how do you coordinate? Do you have like a project coordinator agent? And then do you allow these different agent LLMs to interact with each other? I think that opens up a lot of questions about how are they going to defer appropriately? Will one try to overtake the other? Is it like a majority vote? Have you read anything, or either in the research literature, or maybe just thought experiments out there, or thought about it yourself?
I think it's too early to say, but you could see things spiral out of control, right? If they, I have seen I don't know if you know the YouTube series, the 2 Minute Papers. A while ago, there was an episode where multiple little AI agents would solve some kind of riddle, and then they started to collaborate, and it's pretty interesting to see. I can't recall which episode exactly, but I mean, there it can go well, but it could also go very, very wrong, right? As far as agents go, the only experience I have is just with ChatGPT. For example, giving it a specific role. If you're writing a grant, you can say, I would like you to be, I'm sure we all know these examples, but maybe the listeners don't. I would like you to act as a professional grant writer with 10 years of working experience, who is very successful and very highly paid, and things like that, right? So then that is like a little agent, and now we have in ChatGPT the GPTs, and I don't know if that's already happening, but they could be sold as well. People can develop that, and I can see something like that in healthcare as well, but then heavily controlled, obviously.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Radiology AI podcast. Tune in next time to hear part 2 of our conversation with our esteemed panel.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Radiology Artificial Intelligence podcast. Shout out to Yuri Ishimchisen for our podcast music, and to the RSNA podcast staff.
Email us at podcasts@rsna.org anytime with questions, feedback, or suggestions.